Guinness Book of World Records, the world's oldest living person is a British man named John Alfred Tinniswood. He's 111 years old. However, there's a man who lives in Peru who might be Tinniswood's senior by 13 years, and his name is Marcelino Abad Tolentino. Earlier this month, he celebrated his 124th birthday. That means he was reportedly born at the turn of the last century, before there was air conditioning, before the Wright brothers took flight, before the teddy bear was invented. So why am I using words like might be and reportedly? Because Guinness hasn't verified this yet. In fact, the Reuters news agency reports that Peru's government only became aware of Abad Tolentino 5 years ago when he was at the tender age of 119 and received a government ID and retirement pension. Authorities in Peru say they've reached out to Guinness to help Abad Tolentino apply for the title. If it's granted, he won't only be the oldest person alive, he'll be the oldest person ever verified by Guinness, which to this point is a 122-year-old French woman who passed away in 1997. The world's largest country by area is our next destination on The World from A to Z. I'm Carl Azuz. Thanks so much for watching. Even though it's the 9th most populated nation on Earth, with more than 141 million people, Russia is by far the largest in terms of space, with more than 6.6 million square miles of land and water. And it's an excess of water that's the problem, as melting snow combined with heavy rains have caused the Ural River to burst its banks and flood areas of southwest Russia and western Kazakhstan. That nation's president says the floods might be the region's largest disaster in 80 years. More than 100,000 people have had to evacuate their homes.
Catastrophic flooding and thousands of lives appended across several regions in Russia, forcing many to evacuate with just their pets and a handful of belongings. At least 3 people are reported to have died so far. Authorities declared a state of emergency in the Orenburg region near Kazakhstan, after the Ural, Europe's 3rd longest river, swelled several meters and burst through a dam embankment in Orsk, a city of more than 200,000 residents. The anger there was palpable on Monday, with protesters chanting "Shame on you" at local officials and "Putin help" over the government's response. The city mayor said the flood has now peaked, according to Russian state news agency TASS. And the Kremlin spokesperson described the deluge in these regions as inevitable due to an abnormal increase in water levels. Across the border in Kazakhstan, the country's president said the floods were his country's worst natural disaster in decades. In Russia, the country's emergency situations minister flew over some of the flooded zones on Tuesday to inspect the damage. And over in the Kurgan region, melting ice and torrential rains caused another river to overflow. This is not a joke, the regional governor says bluntly. Leave, take your papers, valuables, children, elderly relatives with limited mobility. You need to do this now, he says. Flood waters in Kurgan are expected to rise even higher, putting thousands more lives at risk and wreaking even more havoc.
On this date in world history, one of the world's most famous emperors and military commanders gave up his throne on this date in 1814. Napoleon Bonaparte had declared himself emperor over France in 1804. His goal was to ultimately unify Europe under his rule, but over time, several other countries in the region joined forces against him, eventually capturing the capital Paris and banishing Napoleon to the island of Elba. He would escape and briefly return to power, but Napoleon was defeated at the Battle of Waterloo a year later. On April 11, 1968, U.S. President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act into law. One of its major goals was to prevent discrimination against people looking to buy or rent homes. The bill was signed 7 days after Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, and racial tensions were running high in many cities across the country. And on this date in 1970, NASA's Apollo 13 mission launched into space, intending to land on the moon. But 2 days later, an oxygen tank exploded, forcing Commander James Lovell to tell Mission Control, "Houston, we've had a problem." The moon mission turned into a rescue mission, and all 3 astronauts were brought home safely on April 17th. Next, some good news and bad news for the U.S. economy. First, the latest jobs numbers from the government show that 303,000 jobs were added in the month of March. That's considerably more than the 192,000 economists were expecting, and the unemployment rate, the percentage of workers who don't have a job, dropped down a bit from 3.9% in February to 3.8% in March. That's the good news. The bad, inflation, the rise in prices of stuff we commonly buy, increased by 3.5% this March over what it was last March. So a $100 grocery bill last year would cost $103.50 this year. Might not sound like much, but the government's inflation calculator shows how prices have ramped up this decade. What cost $100 in March of 2020 now costs $121. Gasoline, rent, and car insurance are 3 categories of high inflation.
Word and knowledge. Haka is a form of what language? Chinese, Arabic, Japanese, Dutch. Though there are an estimated 80 million Haka people around the world today, Encyclopedia Britannica indicates that many don't speak the Haka variety of Chinese.
If the number of Haka speakers continues to decline until the language itself vanishes, it could take other significant cultural traditions with it. For instance, a distinctive performance art that features Haka.
This is a Taiwanese Haka Opera, a traditional dramatic performance that uses some literary and colloquial, that is, ordinary or familiar, elements of the fast-fading Haka language. Sites like this may grab our attention, but fewer and fewer people are watching in Taiwan.
The young, they seem disinterested in traditional things. It's mostly older people watching.
Haka opera draws on classic themes and elements from Chinese opera, which dates back to about AD 200. Opera performances have changed over the years, but the foundation of familiar stories and themes stays the same. But something else must have to change. Taiwan's opera audiences continue to dwindle. Could be that not as many young people speak Haka, and performances don't resonate like they did with older generations. Performers are adding more attention-grabbing elements to try and raise engagement.
People in the past liked a good story plot and tearjerkers. It's different now. People nowadays like more comedy, exaggeration, martial arts fighting. Only then will they stop and watch.
But with such an old and revered art form, it can be a hard balance to strike.
I think the most pressing thing now is we need to figure out how to entice people to come and watch. We need to combine elements which people like and attract them with traditional opera.
Many performers have spent years training at elite art schools, dedicating their lives to the art. They're not willing to let Haka opera fade away, and they remain hopeful that people will recognize the value of such beautiful performances.
I think operas will continue to exist. I'm optimistic about it. I think it's a great way to gather crowds. When there is a performance, a crowd will gather.
Coast to coast to coast, today's World of Viewers takes us cross-country. On the Pacific Coast, we start with Mrs. Kavidal's class. Vintage High School is watching from Napa, California. On the Gulf Coast, from Senatobia, Mississippi, we welcome Mr. Jones's class. Great to see y'all at Magnolia Heights School. And on the Atlantic Coast, we land in the Georgia community of Peachtree City to hang out at J.C. Booth Middle School with Mr. Thompson's class. There are many strange sights caught on surveillance cameras at train stations. It doesn't really matter where they are. A good example was seen last Friday at a station in Australia. A horse in a blanket just trotting through. We're not sure how he escaped or what exactly was on his mind. Word got out to operators to keep trains slow near the station, and the animal was eventually corralled and loaded onto a trailer where he headed home safely. And that's where his handlers will probably want to keep him glued for a while. Okay, that was in bad taste. But it's clear he can't be allowed to hoof it freely. The Iron Horse is no subway for an actual horse to travel. It could result in a steeplechase that's a nay-winnie situation, especially if the main suspect is trained on the wrong track. I'm Carl Azuz, horsing around on the world from A to Z. We hope to see you tomorrow because you are awesome like Fridays and you mean the world to me.